All right, welcome back. So in this video, we're now going to talk about something that is generally referred to. So it's actually not just me that calls it this. You've probably heard this term before, but it's generally referred to as the champion mindset, right? So you probably have seen that term used in a lot of motivational videos to describe athletes and the state of mind that they're in, and other people who generally accomplish big things. And this is actually a real phenomenon. It actually does describe a very specific state of the subconscious mind, right? And so I actually wanted to go over that in this video. Now, I actually kind of stumbled upon this state, even though I've always heard the term before. I never really analyzed it that much, right? I felt like I pretty much knew it in terms of the what you might call the confidence, subconscious frequency, and just really doing a performance charge with it. I kind of did that when I talked about that time I charged that feeling of being like a king, but the champion mindset is actually different from that, which I didn't know. And so I actually had an experience where I kind of stumbled upon kind of like a new way of using my subconscious, or a new application of it, which eventually led me to understanding what the champion mindset truly is. So I wanted to talk about this in this video. It's actually not in the book, but that happened after I finished the book. But I felt it was important enough that I'll make a video about it. This is actually probably the more complete, probably a more complete look at the nature of confidence, and it covers things we didn't talk about in the last video. So before I go into it, I'll just give a little bit of background in terms of how I stumbled onto it or discovered it for myself. So I went through an experience where something happened which, I don't want to get into it too much. It's a little personal, but something happened that kind of disappointed me, right? And I wasn't really thrilled about the outcome, right? So I felt disappointed. And, I responded to that disappointment the way a lot of people do, right? When you feel disappointed, especially when you feel like you put a lot of effort into something, and you were hoping, which I didn't really put a lot of effort into it, but still I kind of was hoping the outcome would be a little different. In this particular situation I'm talking about, when you're really disappointed and the outcome doesn't go your way, there's you have this feeling almost like you want to beat yourself up, right? You feel like you failed, right? It didn't go their way because you didn't do something you were supposed to. And so your mind starts attacking itself, right? And it's like my mind was trying to do that, right? Now that's a very natural response to that. Well, we're going to go over how that works in a moment. But this time it's different, right? Because during this time, I went through a lot of spiritual changes, right? So we'll talk more about this in book 2, but I'm really giving my life over to Jesus, right? And I'm focusing on these experiences from the perspective of what the purpose of life actually is. Again, we'll talk about that later. So I'm trying to use this as an opportunity. I'm trying to avoid kind of giving into that negative voice, right? That tells me, I'm a failure and I'm weak and this and that. Now, in theory, I could just charge subconscious paths to feel confidence and all of that, but I didn't really feel the need to do that in this particular situation. But but I'm still feeling it, right? So as I keep producing these intentions of disappointment, there's this part of my inner voice, which we're going to talk about in a moment. But this inner voice of mine keeps trying to compel me to perceive myself as a failure, right? Which is subconscious instinct, right? It's charged at a particular frequency to alter my perceptions, perceive that. And I'm but I don't want to. I don't think on a conscious level that's true. I don't believe it, right? And so it's there's these two frequencies charging up in my subconscious. One that keeps trying to tell me I'm a failure because of this disappointment, and the other that's saying, no, that's not true. It doesn't matter what actually happened, right? And so it's almost like they're fighting each other. And every time I feel this urge to think I'm a failure, I'm no, I don't believe that. That's not true. And it's I kept doing that throughout the day. And then, the more the other one, the inner voice of weakness, wins a little bit, it's my perception will start to alter. And it's almost like an argument, right? It's giving a persuasive argument to convince me, no, you are a failure. And I'm yeah, that's kind of true. And then, but there's another voice that says no. And it's they're arguing with each other back and forth. But then there's one moment happened, which was, I don't know that I would call it a spiritual experience, but it was definitely a very interesting experience for me. Right? And when I felt that inner voice kind of tell me I'm weak again, it's like something happened. I just kept saying, no, I don't believe you. And then I just had this huge burst of intention, this burst of willpower. And I just said no, right? And it felt like I pushed it back. Like it actually felt like something happened inside my body, like in terms of like energy. And we'll talk more about energy and that type of energy in chapter 8 of book 2. And when I just had this intense expression of willpower that just pushed it back, it's like I could actually feel that voice get pushed back. And then it got like weaker. Then it was almost completely gone, at least temporarily. And I felt like this energy rising in me, right? I felt like something had changed. I felt this energy rising in me. And I just felt this confidence, right? I just felt this pure sense of like inner strength, right? And it was not encumbered by this inner voice of weakness anymore. And it was like somehow I had developed this intensity of will that just pushed it back, right? And like asserted itself. And it's like, like I said, I could feel like a change in my energy level when I did that. It was like, those anime cartoons where you see, where somebody does something and then they tap into this inner part of their mind and then they have all this power unleashed or whatever. If you watched anime, you've probably seen some version of that 100 times. And I was like, that was a very interesting experience for me because I was thinking about what happened. Then I started analyzing what I did, and I analyzed it from a subconscious perspective, and then I realized what the champion mindset is. And then that's basically where kind of this whole thing comes from. So I'm now going to go, so I just wanted to give that little bit of background, so now I'm going to go into what the champion mindset is, right, and how to charge it. So to go over this first point, the champion mindset is a state of mind that reflects one's drive to quiet or overpower the inner voice within them that tells them that they're weak. I'm trying to think if that's a complete definition of the champion mindset, which that is exactly what it is. But the outcome of this type of mindset also leads to behaviors to achieve great things in your life. Right, things you would consider to be great things. So that'd probably be a more complete definition, but that is an outpour of this basic definition. Right? So in other words, the champion mindset is when you have this, when your subconscious is charged in such a way that you feel the urge to just overpower and conquer that inner voice. I call it the inner voice of weakness. Right? But then what is the inner voice of weakness? Where does that come from? What am I even talking about? Well, to understand confidence from a more complete perspective, you absolutely need to recognize what the inner voice of weakness is and understand it, right? And a lot of people don't, so they have a lot of trouble with confidence. Confidence is a very difficult emotion to properly charge and to master, right? Remember what I said. When it comes to charging emotion, which is an intensity type charge, you have, basically there's a learning curve to it, right? Different stories will charge different types of frequencies. And when it comes to a performance charge, which confidence is usually more useful as a performance charge, otherwise you just get the drop-off effect. But as a performance charge, you can use different intentions to get different types of performances. So confidence is a very tricky and difficult charge to master for performance. And the reason why is ultimately because of this inner voice problem. So what is the inner voice of weakness? Well, the inner voice of weakness, actually I just want to read this. Oh yeah, so I'm just reading this next point. So the deterring inner voice, which is just the inner voice of weakness, it develops from your own assessment of your failures and also from others. So in other words, the inner voice of weakness, it comes from it's a consequence of two things that occurs with your intention. You can almost think of it, I think it's like there's a Native American, what's the word I want to use? There's a Native American allegory, is that the right word? Or story about two wolves, right? Which I actually talk about that in chapter 3 of book 2. But the two wolves, there's two wolves at war inside of us, right? So you know what? I don't even want to say that because I use that same story in book 2. But what I'm going to say is that the inner voice of weakness, there are two things that make it stronger, right? It's like it takes food from two places. And the more it gets fed, the more that inner voice of weakness grows. So one of those places is from your own assessment of when you have failed, right? Now, This is something I believe based on what I believe to be the purpose of life, which we'll talk about in book 2. But there are no failures in life, right? There are only learning experiences. And you've probably heard some variation of that 100 times, if you watched motivational videos, and it's absolutely true, right? Failing doesn't really exist in that way. Excuse me. However, our conscious mind can still look at things as failures, right? So let's say I want to, shoot a 3-point shot, right? I shoot a 3-pointer and I miss, right? Now in my mind, I failed. I missed that shot. Now it's perfectly possible for me to miss the shot without considering myself a failure. It just really depends on what type of intention I produce to contextualize that circumstance. But if it's the last shot of the game and we're playing a rival team and everyone's depending on me to win and I missed the shot, right? Now they won because I missed it, right? I'll be disappointed in myself, right? I'll feel like a failure. But why do I feel like a failure? I feel like a failure because I produced an intention which says the command components express a context which says that I missed the shot, I let everyone down, it's bad to let everyone down, and then I failed at what I was hoping to succeed at, right? So the part of intention that calls myself a failure and says that failing is bad causes me to feel bad about myself, right? Because if failing is bad and I produce intention that alters my perception to perceive myself as a failure, then my subconscious has to be at a negative frequency and associate failing with myself. So I'll just feel bad because technically my conscious mind is just analyzing what happened in a very emotionless, just as a matter of fact way, and is saying, oh, you missed a shot, therefore you failed, right? You let everybody down, you failed. It may not even necessarily be you may not be doing it in a sense of attacking yourself. In other words, you might not intentionally be trying to do that. Your intention is just saying you failed. However, we talked about this in terms of subconscious dissonance, right, in chapter 12. You can produce that intention, but your subconscious mind sees that as a command, right? And in order to see yourself as failing, your subconscious mind has to switch to the frequency that will allow you to see yourself as a failure. And that's a negative frequency. So the act of seeing yourself as a failure, just in a very logical way, ultimately led to your subconscious seeing yourself as a failure in a more emotional way, in terms of charging a belief, right? So the inner voice of weakness, part of where it comes from is when you have determined that you failed at something. Even if you're just trying to do it more logically, it's going to have an effect on you subconsciously due to subconscious dissonance. And the more you kind of perceive yourself as failing at things, right, the more that your subconscious will charge to perceive yourself as a failure. So another way of saying that is that the inner voice of weakness gets stronger, right? But that's one place where the inner voice of weakness comes from. Now the other place is the much bigger problem, right? Because the first place it's not that hard to solve. It's not that difficult a problem to solve, right? All you got to do is kind of just not see yourself as a failure in order to contextualize the event that occurred differently that you assess as a failure originally, and then this inner voice won't grow as much. It's still a problem in the first case, but it's not as big a problem. The second place that makes your inner voice of weakness stronger is a much bigger problem. It's much more annoying. It's really where the problem of confidence comes from, why it's such a difficult emotion to master. So to go over this next point, when people criticize you, you criticize yourself through the reflection principle. So what does that actually mean? Well, remember what we said about the reflection principle, right? So we have a natural tendency or urge to produce an intention that reflects what we're observing, right? So it's a very simple phenomenon, but it's one I think a lot of people don't really realize on a conscious level that this is happening. So when someone attacks you, right, or we'll just say criticizes you, when someone criticizes you, good or negative, right, positive or negative, you'll produce an intention that reflects what they're saying. So if they call you stupid, right, in order to understand what they just said, you have to produce an intention which says that this person called you stupid, right? So you basically in order to properly or more fully perceive the context, you have to see yourself as stupid, right? They didn't call themselves stupid, they called you stupid, right? So in order for you to properly perceive it, like you have to say, oh, I'm stupid, right? Even if you're saying they said you're stupid, you still have to perceive yourself as stupid in order to recognize what they said. That's why you get offended if someone calls you stupid. If they call someone else stupid, or if they call themselves stupid, you won't get offended. So it's very simple, but that's actually what's happening, right? And that's very consequential. So when someone calls me stupid, to perceive what they just said, I will reflexively, for a moment, think of myself as stupid. And my subconscious has to switch to a frequency and alter my perception, perceive myself as stupid. And that obviously is a very negative frequency. So if I call myself stupid, then that's a negative frequency, because I have asserted that stupidity is negative. It's bad. It's not even really bad. It's just something my conscious mind has asserted is bad. And so my subconscious alters my perception, just perceive myself in a bad way if I consider myself stupid. So you see how easily you can affect someone's subconscious mind when you attack them, even verbally. You can actually get that person to charge a negative frequency. So we can almost in a sense call it almost like a low self-esteem frequency, right? So if I call you stupid, or if I say you're ugly, right, or you're a failure, right, you're likely going to, your subconscious will switch to a frequency, alter your perception, and on that it needs to be on this frequency that feels very negative, right, in order to perceive yourself as all these things you've determined to be negative. Right, so like I said, very simple, but highly consequential. And even now, if someone says something good, positive, right, they say, you're amazing, or you're awesome, right, you're a champion, right, that causes your subconscious to switch to a frequency, to alter your perception, to perceive yourself as all these wonderful things that you have determined are good. So your subconscious has to be on a positive frequency to perceive yourself as these good things you have determined are good. So when you compliment someone, they feel good, right? So you can see just either criticizing someone either positively or negatively has a huge consequential effect on their subconscious mind if they're to interpret what you said. Now, if they just zone out and ignore you, it won't have any effect. But you can't really do that, right? That's going to be very hard to do, right? If you're in a conversation with someone or you're interacting with people who are criticizing you. It's also really, just to go over it a little bit more, it also plays into what I said about subconscious forms, right? So if you look at something, if it is a good approximation of some subconscious form, which is associated with some frequency, when you observe it, you feel inspired to produce an intention or a form intention that is similar, a form intention that will charge your subconscious and alter your perception to perceive something that matches that frequency of what you observe, which is a very long-winded and technical way of saying, I'll just give an example. Let's say I listen to relaxing music. It's going to be very hard for me to listen to relaxing music and not feel relaxed. It's super hard to do that because the subconscious mind naturally charges in a specific way when I observe certain arrangement patterns, right? So if you take an arrangement pattern in music or in sounds, right, relaxing music has a specific arrangement pattern. It'll be very difficult for me to listen to noise or super fast-paced music and feel relaxed because it's not a good approximation of the subconscious form associated with inner peace and relaxation. So it's the same principle here, right? When someone attacks you negatively, it's very difficult. That's a good approximation of what you might call the low self-esteem frequency. Anytime your subconscious charges at that frequency, is going to be attacking. Your perception will be altered to perceive yourself as something bad, right? So anything that attacks you is a good approximation of that frequency in terms of the arrangement pattern. So ultimately, this is where those two places are where the inner voice of weakness comes from, right? Which is really just I call it the inner voice of weakness, which is very metaphorical, but really it's just a consequence of the reflection principle, right? In consequence of the reflection principle from subconscious dissonance, when you just logically assess where you have failed, and also from the consequence of the reflection principle from perceiving subconscious forms. Right? If someone's attacking you, that's a good approximation of the low self-esteem frequency and subconscious form associated with it. So how do we get around this inner voice of weakness? How do we face it? Because clearly this inner voice of weakness if you really think about it, it's really this that's responsible for why we have such a problem with confidence. If we were in certain situations where these two sort of parameters that determine the strength of your inner voice or weakness, if we were in situations where these didn't apply, then it'd be easy, right, to charge confidence. So if I want to charge confidence to eat a bowl of cereal, right, confidence frequency is the frequency that makes you feel like you're capable of doing something, right? So if I want to feel capable and super confident that I could get a bowl of cereal, right, that would be easy. Who cares, right? There's nothing special about that, because it's not a circumstance that I've in the past or might think of myself as a failure doing, because it's so easy and no one's going to criticize me for it, right? So it doesn't matter that I can charge confidence for that circumstance. Confidence is almost only a useful emotion in circumstances that apply to these two conditions. So if you fail at something, you want to feel confident in that failure, so you don't feel like you don't want to try anymore, right? Because failing feels so bad, it might make you just give up and stop trying, so you don't feel that negative feeling. No, right? If I'm a confident person, that's not going to happen. Even if I fail, I'm still going to keep going. So you want to charge confidence in that situation. If someone attacks you, right, you want to be confident in the face of that attack. If they tell you you're stupid or you're ugly, you want to say, no, I'm not stupid. I'm not whatever you said. And you want to have that confidence to still believe in yourself. So it's very difficult, so confidence is only useful in these circumstances. But in these same circumstances, your subconscious is charging the negative frequency, which is almost like the opposite of confidence, which we're going to talk about that in a moment. But before I go into the solution to this problem, how do we charge confidence in the face of this stupid inner voice of weakness? Well, before I go into the solution, there's two things I want to say. What some people do, and most people aren't really thinking of all of this, right, on a subconscious level, but everyone has the problem of that inner voice of weakness trying to deter them, right? So they find different solutions to deal with that problem. One of the solutions that they usually do is kind of what I said earlier. They'll stop chasing circumstances where they can fail, right? Because failing feels bad. It feels terrible when you think of yourself as a failure, and your subconscious treats that as a command, right? And says you want to perceive yourself as a failure, right? So it adjusts your perception to perceive that, which feels terrible. And so what people will do is they'll say, okay, I'm just going to not go after situations that don't have a very high chance of success. Then I can avoid this feeling and this feeling like a failure. Then I can feel more confident. There's only one problem with that. Nothing in life that's really worth it is going to have a high chance of success. Like, you know what I mean? So if you only do things that you know you'll be successful at, then you'll never really accomplish anything meaningful. That's a problem with low confidence people, right? Is that they don't take risk. They don't go for it. You know what I mean? They only stick to the things that's very easy and success is virtually guaranteed. But what they're really trying to do is avoid this problem. They're trying to avoid that feeling of a failure because it feels so terrible, because that's going to feed their inner voice of weakness, right? So that inner voice of weakness is very strong in this type of person, and they kind of obey it, right? Like, basically, you better not take that risk, otherwise I'm going to make you feel like a failure more. And you know how much that hurts. So they're like, okay, fine, I'll go after the thing I know is going to be successful, right? And the inner voice is like, yeah, that's right. You know what I mean? So that's one solution to the end that people do, which doesn't really work. It works, but it's not good to do, right? You're not really tapping into the highest version of yourself. The other solution that people will do is kind of what I talked about in chapter 4, which is what I did. They will sort of face that. This has to do with this problem. When people are criticizing you, when people criticize you, it makes that inner voice of weakness more powerful, right? And so that's why you see some people have huge problems with criticism, because that inner voice of weakness within them is so strong, right? That if they attack you or call you a name, right? If they attack that person and call them a name, that inner voice of weakness grows, and then it attacks through subconscious, the effective subconscious mind. The inner voice of weakness will call them a failure, or call that person something negative, or a loser, or whatever. And then they don't like that feeling, so they just hate when people criticize them. So some people will try to just not go in situations where they can be criticized, or they'll lash out at people that criticize them, or try to be around people who they know won't criticize them. Sometimes people will criticize a person first before they criticize them, because it kind of softens the blow. If you feel like the person's intent is just to get back at you for what you said, then it's less believable, right? So that's why you see some people are it's almost like they're mean, right? But what they're really trying to do, it's basically insecurity, right? It's an insecurity where they're trying to get to everyone else first, or get to someone first before they can attack them. So now, if they attack them, then it doesn't hurt as much. Because if someone, let's say someone you really like or you love attacks you, who never says something bad about you, then one day they just say something so mean about you, it's like it's more true, right? Their intent was more pure. So it's almost like part of your mind says, it must be true if they said it, right? And so the inner voice of weakness grows like crazy when someone you love, or someone that never criticizes you, says something bad about you. On the other hand, if someone you don't like, who's already an enemy, always talks crap about you and you talk crap about them, if they say it, it's like it doesn't count because you don't really believe it, right? Which is ultimately, at the end of the day, all that really matters is how much you believe it. So that's some of these solutions that some people will use to get around this problem. Another solution is they'll try to make themselves immune, right, to criticism. So they just take so much criticism, or they kind of observe it so much, and they're hoping that they sort of become immune to it, which never happens, right? So, for example, I've seen certain people online, just for whatever reason, they'll read all of their negative comments. Like, why are you doing that, right? So it almost seems like a form of, I wouldn't go as far as saying self-hate, but it's like, that's not a good way to treat yourself, to just go through your negative comments. Like this person, I mean, it's no problem to just kind of read your negative comments out of curiosity, but this person would regularly sort of subject themselves to the worst comments about themselves. It's like a ritual for them, right? And they'll build comments about, I hate you, you're stupid, you're ugly, I wish you would, I don't even know how much I can say on these videos, right? But, I don't know how much is censored, but they'll just say the words, like, why are you subjecting yourself to these negative comments? And that's also a form of insecurity. What this person was ultimately doing was they were trying to make themselves immune to it so it doesn't hurt anymore. And what that really amounts to on a subconscious level, they're trying to build negative memory to it. But negative memory doesn't do that. Negative memory will not make you incapable of feeling an emotion, right? So no matter how old some song is and how much negative memory you have for it, you still feel some emotion, right, when you listen to it. It's just not enough, right? It's a song is old and you don't listen to it anymore because it's not enough emotion, right? So you will still get a little bit. And if you keep sort of forcing yourself to deal with these negative circumstances, you're still going to feel a little bit of that negative emotion. Why would you even want to feel that little bit? And even then, your subconscious can still charge, right? So when something is old, right, there's a lot more negative memory to positive memory, but there's still a little bit of positive memory, so you still feel a little bit of emotion. But even then, if you really keep observing it, your subconscious can still charge, right, past that negative memory, and you'll just feel more of that self-hate and that low self-esteem frequency, right? And it doesn't really solve anything. Right, so some people will do that, which is an insecurity. I know I'm kind of going on a tangent, but I just feel these things are important to talk about because I feel like you will see these different behaviors as ways of trying to solve the inner voice of weakness problem. Another one has to do with us men, right? So we don't like, when we ask a chick out, right, we don't want to be rejected. Why does it feel so terrible to be rejected? Well, because when a girl rejects you, through the reflection principle, in order to properly assess what happened, right, your subconscious has to switch to the frequency where you see yourself as a reject, right? And that feels bad. It especially feels bad in front of people or in front of someone, right? And then you feel anxious when you're asking a girl out because we talked about the subconscious path associated with when you perceive something that you don't want, you feel like something you don't want is about to happen, you feel better as you feel like you're going away from it, and then you feel worse as you're getting close to it. So if you think a girl might reject you, you feel like you're getting closer to it, you feel more and more anxiety. So even your body is charging a negative frequency, which like gives that negative frequency a boost. So a combination of that plus feeling like a failure will feel really, really terrible, right? So a lot of guys will be nervous about asking a girl out, or they just won't ask the girl out so that their inner voice of weakness doesn't get stronger. Basically, the stronger it gets, the worse you feel, right? So, but I have seen some guys do something kind of strange, right? What they'll do is they'll just keep approaching random women, and they don't do it in like a smooth way. They do it in a kind of very weird way. I don't like using the term weird, but they do it in a way that's not very social, right? It's not really respecting the woman's space, right? It's not respecting their space or even their sovereignty to a degree, right? I've seen these guys kind of just approach random chicks on the street and kind of say kind of strange things in an effort to kind of establish communication and kind of establish this kind of air of like, oh, I don't care if you reject me, I don't care what you say. Meanwhile, they're also trying to bag her, right? So it doesn't really make sense. But and you've probably seen those videos, right? I remember this one guy, he actually got arrested for kind of harassing women too much. And it seems like very strange behavior, right? But I know what they're doing because I know what happens on the subconscious level. What they're trying to do is deal with the inner voice of weakness problem, right? They're trying to build so much negative memory to the idea of being rejected. And also they're doing a little bit of this, what we talked about for the previous solution too. If they approach a girl in a certain way, well, now if she rejects you, it doesn't really count because I kind of, no, not this one. We talked about our person attack you first to sort of make your attack back not as strong, right? It doesn't feed the inner voice of weakness as much. So they might approach a girl in a way where now if you reject me, well, hey, I don't care because I was a little bit annoying with you too, right? So that's kind of what they're doing, and they're trying to build negative memory to it. So ultimately, what these people are really trying to do is solve the inner voice of weakness problem. So I just wanted to go over that. I thought that was important enough to say, even though it was a little bit long. You will see many people do these things to solve this problem, but all of these things are kind of, they are, I guess, solutions, but there's a better solution, right? So what is the better solution? Oh, actually, one last thing before I go over the proper solution. And I used to do this a lot. What you might try to do to solve this problem is you might try to, when someone attacks you, or if you're in a situation where you feel like you might be attacked, because that'll cause the anxiety frequency to charge, you might try to alter your perception to perceive it like, oh, well, this isn't really a situation where I could be attacked. And if someone attacks me, I'm just not going to think of it as an attack, right? So I used to do that a lot too. Because I have a huge problem with public speaking, socializing. So I guess part of me, and I didn't really know all this at the time, but I guess it kind of makes sense now that I'm saying it. Part of me would feel like I'm in a situation where I could be attacked or could be judged by others. So anyone who has a public speaking problem knows what I'm talking about. And so what I would try to do is alter my perception I actually talked about it a little bit before. If I focus on the situation as having a lot of fun, it's like it completely goes away, right? Because now the subconscious form or that I'm seeing, or the arrangement pattern this circumstance approximates, looks like a fun frequency, the anxiety goes away, and now my perception is altered to not believe I'll be attacked or anything like that. So that was my solution. But when I didn't do that, I kind of just adjust my perception. That didn't always work, right? Because the moment someone attacks me a little tiny bit, all of that anxiety comes back, and then that inner voice of weakness grows. Okay, so what is the proper solution to the inner... Well, there's many solutions. I don't know that I should call it the proper solution. But one of the most powerful solutions, right, would be this one. So I'm going to go... It's kind of a lot to explain. I'll just read it, and then I'll go over it. So the proper solution, or the most powerful solution to the problem of criticism, I meant to really say the problem of the inner voice of weakness, is to do a belief charge. A belief charge whose subjects or paths are associated with doubt, both internally and externally. So let me break that down. So, in other words, the solution to the inner voice of weakness problem is to learn how to charge the feeling of confidence, right? Specifically in circumstances where the inner voice of weakness will mostly show up at. Now, we talked about where those two circumstances generally are. So that the inner voice of weakness gets strong when you have failed at something and you assess that you failed. That's basically that definitely leads to doubt. But I define it as doubt here. But specifically, when you're in a situation and feel you failed, right? That assessment alone generally causes you to doubt yourself. So the inner voice of weakness gets stronger. So you want to actually charge the feeling of confidence right there, right? And also, when someone criticizes you negatively, you want to charge the inner voice of, you want to charge the feeling of confidence right there as well. Like I said, I don't care about charging confidence in circumstances when the inner voice of weakness isn't around, right? So if I'm getting cereal, I'm walking to the store, that's not a challenge. I don't have to worry about failing at that or somebody negatively criticizing me. So I could charge a huge amount of confidence in that circumstance because it's not going up against the inner voice of weakness. So I only want to charge it in those two circumstances where the inner voice of weakness shows itself. And what that ultimately means on a subconscious level is that I want to perform an antithetical charge, right? So that's not even something we talked about yet, right? So remember when I said in I believe it was chapter 2, that certain frequencies are very difficult to charge at the same time. So they're antithetical to each other. So if I focus on a girl, right, let's say I charge the feeling of love while I focus on her and the feeling of having lots of fun. Well, those are easy frequencies. Those are, sometimes I call them synthetic frequencies, but I don't really like that term. But they're very easy frequencies to charge at the same time. But if I focus on the same girl and charge the feeling of love and the feeling of hating her, right? Those are very hard frequencies to charge at the same time. I could do it, right? Like I said, I performed the experiment out of curiosity. I don't know if it was that frequency, but I performed an experiment with frequencies I felt were antithetical to each other. And it worked, but it felt very weird, right? Because they're opposites. So it'd be very hard to charge those two frequencies at once. Usually it's going to be one or the other, and then frequencies that are synthetic or naturally charged with it. But confidence is a very strange frequency. It's one of these. I think it's the only frequency that I've ever seen that makes sense to charge antithetically. So that's why I call it antithetical charge, right? You only want it. It's most useful to charge confidence only when its opposite is also charging, right? So we could call it the low self-esteem frequency. So the frequency that makes you feel like you're a piece of crap, right? And you'll never accomplish anything, and that you're a failure. It's right when in circumstances, things you focus on that cause you, well, let me back up. Let's say that there's a circumstance that causes you to do that. That's still a subject. You can still think of that as a subject, or if it's an activity, you could think of it as a subconscious path, right? But when you focus on that subject or that activity, your subconscious recognizes it. It goes to the subconscious memory or set of memories, ordered set of memories, right? And those memories switch to an active state, and they access that low self-esteem frequency, and you feel like a failure again, right? So, for example, let's say I ask some chick out and she rejects me, right? Now I feel like a failure. The moment I start to talk to her again, that activity looks to my subconscious like the activity where I asked her out and she rejected me. So my subconscious path switched to an active state, and I feel that sense of failure again. And so, which, in other words, that's the inner voice of weakness. So I might feel awkward about talking to her the next day because just even seeing her makes me feel like a failure. So she's the subject associated with the subconscious memory that carries the failness frequency, or carries the failness charge. It carries the failure charge. But really, it's the, like I said, I just like to use the term inner voice of weakness. You could think of it as saying she carries the inner voice of weakness charge. She makes that voice stronger. So I want to avoid her, right? Because I felt bad. She makes me feel like a reject, right? If I play basketball, let's say I don't know how to play basketball and I play basketball like crazy, right? And I fail at it like crazy, right? People say I suck and they call me names, and I also, according to my own assessment, believe I failed, right? Then when I even think of playing basketball, the inner voice of weakness gets super powerful, and it calls me a failure, and I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that because I don't want to feel like a failure again. So that the inner voice of weakness will grow stronger and stronger the more I either fail at stuff, the more I think of myself as failing at things, or the more people criticize me and call me a failure. So those activities would be the subject, or they would be the subject or the activity, right, associated with the inner voice of weakness. Now, the irony is that it's specifically then, right there, that you want to charge now the feeling of confidence. So, in other words, if I ask a chick out, and she rejects me, and now my subconscious is charging that negative feeling and saying that I'm a failure, it's now that I want to charge the feeling of confidence. But it's very hard to charge both, right? The feeling of confidence makes me feel like a success. It makes me feel like I'm capable, that I didn't fail, and that I'll succeed. How can I charge that right when I just failed and my subconscious is altering my perception to perceive that I failed. That's very hard to do, right? So that's the antithetical charge. And ultimately, that is why the confidence frequency is a very difficult frequency to master. It is only useful when you charge it in these situations where it makes the least amount of sense to charge it, or where it's the hardest to charge it, because you have to charge it with its antithetical frequency. And this is what I learned, and this is actually what I did when I kept feeling those negative feelings telling me that I'm like this and I'm that, and my inner voice of weakness is attacking me, calling me a failure. And I just kept saying no to it, right? I don't believe that. And then I just produced this huge burst of belief and intention that just finally pushed it back and silenced it. And then I just felt like, I felt good. Like the inner voice of weakness got super quiet. I didn't feel like a failure at all. And I just felt so powerful, so successful, because now it's very easy to charge a feeling of confidence now that the inner voice of weakness is no longer around, or at least temporarily it was gone. So how do you, so that's basically more of a, we didn't really go into technique yet. That's more of the theory on what's going on. So how do you actually perform this special kind of charge to do this, right? How do you charge confidence specifically in circumstances that your subconscious memory associates with the frequency of failing and has charged to believe you're a failure? I hope I'm explaining correctly. It's all very technical and abstract, but this is what I did then. You would actually perform a subconscious burst charge, right? So we talked about two types of subconscious bursts. We talked about excitement burst and a calm burst. So transcendental performance charges generally are excitement bursts, but more specifically, a transcendental performance charge can lean in more into different transcendental mental abilities. So I could charge my subconscious for transcendental performance, for dancing, right? That would be more of a charge that focuses on transcendental control. Of course, all my transcendental mental abilities will be affected by that charge, but it can lean more into transcendental control. If I want to charge my subconscious, or singing, right? Same thing, transcendental control. If I want to charge my subconscious to be a comedian and make jokes like crazy, right? My subconscious will have to organize in a highly complex way to compel me to be able to tell jokes, but I'm leaning more into transcendental creativity, even though I would still feel the emotion of humor and move my body in certain ways that match the humor frequency and things like that. So I still get all my mental abilities, transcendental mental abilities. The solution to the inner voice of weakness problem is going to be a transcendental performance charge that leans more into a belief, right? Transcendental belief. So you want your transcendental belief to say that you are capable, that you're amazing, and that you're going to achieve and you're going to be successful. There's different types of intentions you can use. I like to use the intention that I just associate with the feeling of ambition, right? I'm going to accomplish this no matter what, right? No matter what happens, I'm going to achieve this and nobody's going to be able to stop me. You know what I mean? And so I like to use that intention. And what I'll actually do is, the goal when you're doing this type of charge is to get that belief, perform as intense a subconscious burst as possible with that belief, right? You don't want to give yourself a headache, right? Because if you use intention with your negative mind and just express it harder, right, and with more force, that's just going to give you a headache. Like I said, trying to burst with your negative mind, that's not how it works. It doesn't matter how hard you hold an intention or how much force you use. It doesn't do anything to your subconscious. It's just going to give you a headache. What you want is your subconscious to be the one to burst, right? Give a burst of effort. So I recommend to review that, maybe if you kind of forgotten maybe what a subconscious burst is. But just to go over real quickly, an excitement burst more specifically, if I'm using my negative mind, right, and I'm moving my arm, I can move it like this, or I can move it like that, right? Your subconscious can do the same thing. If you want to produce an emotion, for example, if you enter a transcendental state, on a level of instinct, you can produce an emotion kind of like that, or you can produce it like that, right? Like crazy. So you want to almost do an explosion of emotion if you were to do an excitement burst with emotion. But you can do the same thing with transcendental belief. You can just do it at a subconscious level. You can do a burst of belief in terms of asserting or believing something to be true. And if you keep going in and out of a transcendental state, charging that belief within a huge amount of excitement burst, you're going to do an excitement burst charge. And if you keep doing it as an intense burst, then your charge is going to almost have a kind of behavior like this. You know what I mean? And if you only do like a slight excitement burst, then your charging behavior is your subconscious will feel like this, right? And that's probably usually the one you would have, like if you charge for, let's say, conversation, for example. Like if you see someone in conversation, you'll notice that they kind of give a burst in their speech and what they're doing and the way they're moving. But if you do a huge burst like this over and over, it's going to keep growing. Usually there's no real reason to burst that much, but I have learned that it is useful to burst like that with belief in terms of ambition and feeling like you're going to succeed right in the circumstances where your inner voice of weakness is strong, right? Now, your inner voice of weakness usually comes with anxiety. So the combination of the inner voice of weakness, calling yourself a failure, plus your body being anxious and trying to charge your subconscious into the anxiety frequency, which makes you want to flee or get away from the subject or activity you've associated with your own failure. Because of that, it's like you need a very powerful burst to sort of cancel it out. Otherwise, it's going to pull you in like quicksand, right? Those charges and those frequencies are going to pull you toward the feeling of seeing yourself as a failure, wanting to run away. And if you charge the confidence frequency, again, these are antithetical charges, so they're hard to charge at the same time. But if you charge the confidence frequency a little bit, it's going to be overpowered by those negative frequencies, plus your body's charging it too. So it's twice as hard. So that's why you have to produce an extraordinary burst and keep doing it, right? And if you keep doing it, you're going to notice that feeling of weakness is now weak. It's not as strong now, right? It's not pulling you in as much because now the burst charge is now pulling your belief in your subconscious, the state of your subconscious, its frequency this way, more toward ambition. So this is all very technical, but this is ultimately what happens at a subconscious level. And so as an example, let's say a chick you're talking to a chick, right? Now she rejected you and you feel like a failure. What you would do in that circumstance is enter a transcendental state. And you could do a mind charge too, so it doesn't even have to be in person, right? You could do a mind charge and you would create an activity in your mind that looks similar enough to the real world circumstance that those same subconscious paths will be called when you get in the real world circumstance. But you would enter a state in your mind where, let's say I'm thinking about the chick, the girl. Now I feel like a failure as soon as I think of her because those subconscious paths were accessed. What I can now do is hold the intention, enter a transcendental state, and do a burst of belief that says I'm not going to fail, and I am going to bag this chick. Like, I don't care what nobody says, right? I'm going to succeed. You're going to feel how hard it is to do that because it's an antithetical charge. So even if it's not a real world environment, it's just in your mind, you're still going to feel it's so hard to do that. Your subconscious is going to want to back away and say, no, I want to run and get out of here because I don't want to feel like a failure. That's your inner voice of weakness. And if you do a burst of belief against it, even in the face of that circumstance, it's going to feel hard, but you're going to notice that you felt a little bit better. You felt a little bit stronger in the face of that inner voice of weakness. And if you keep charging that, if you keep telling a story in your mind, right, and you do it from different angles and different perspectives, develop a little bit of universality relative to this activity, you're going to notice that now you feel better, right? Even in the face of being rejected and people laughing at you, calling you a failure, you don't feel like a failure as much. You still feel it, but now you got something else in your mind. You got like this inner voice of strength, right? And this inner voice of strength, as you keep burst charging specifically in these activities that make you feel like a failure, it's like now it starts to even things out. Now it's like as much as it might feel like a failure, you also feel like a winner at the same time. And if you keep burst charging it more, now it starts to overpower your inner voice of weakness, and now you just feel strong. And that, once you finally do that, you now have charged your subconscious to have what I call the champion mindset, right? So to go over this point, which I think we already really covered it, but it says ambitious belief should ideally be charged so intensely that it swamps out the inner voice of weakness. This requires an excitement burst charge. So swamp out, I don't know if I explained it in previous videos. That's a term I sometimes use. When you swamp something out, that's actually a term in engineering, which just means if you have two values, right? You make one value so large that it makes the initial value inconsequential. The initial value is not changing. And so ultimately you want to have this excitement burst charge in these activities that are difficult or make you feel like a failure. You want to charge the belief of ambition so powerfully and so intensely, right? that it makes that inner voice of weakness very, very small, because it's not growing it's growing a little bit while you're doing this, because you're in an environment that makes you feel like a failure. But that's why you need to keep bursting the feeling of ambition so much, because as long as you're trying to burst in and focusing all your attention on it, the inner voice of weakness is not going to grow that much, and then eventually it just gets swamped out. And so so that leads to what I call the champion mindset. And so I have done this, right? So it's a very amazing charge. It feels incredible. So, like me, for example, if I've actually experienced it when I'll walk around, right, and I'll just focus on certain things that if people said this about me and they criticize me this way, it would make me. It's like your subconscious is very volatile to certain types of criticism, because that represents your insecurity, right? So it's volatile at a negative frequency. If someone says this thing about me, I'm not gonna care. I could care less. That does not gonna bother me. But if they say one thing, that'll bother me, because technically I also believed it, but I wanted to avoid that truth, right? So my subconscious is volatile at a negative frequency relative to that criticism. So certain criticisms will really make a person feel bad. It's like a weakness within them, like a crack in their armor. But if you keep thinking about those types of things where your weaknesses are, and you just keep charging that inner voice that says, no, I'm gonna achieve this, I don't care what nobody says. I don't care, like I'm gonna win. Basically, I'm gonna succeed no matter what happens. If you just keep kind of telling yourself that, like I said, it sounds a little bit easy if you think about doing it in situations that aren't challenging. But you're going to see, if you want to practice this, you're going to see when you do it specifically in the areas that make you feel weak, you're going to notice how hard it is to perform that simple charge. But that's why you have to practice it. And when you keep performing that charge, your belief gets to a level of such intensity. It's like amazing, right? Because now anytime you get in a situation where someone might criticize you, or you might think of yourself as a failure, your subconscious jumps into that charge, right? So it basically jumps into a state where it accesses the charge of both frequencies. So it'll access the charge that says you're weak, and it'll access the charge that says you're strong, because you've charged it both ways for this circumstance that generally makes you feel like a failure. And the one that you've made way stronger, the part of you that you would call a champion, the champion mindset part of you, when that part is so strong, it's like you can just walk around in circumstances that would normally make you feel insecure and strong and make you feel weaker. And your subconscious is just, you can feel your subconscious reacting like you're in the zone, basically. And you just feel this urge to just say no, right? And you feel this urge to just completely overpower it. And your willpower is so strong. Like when I've done this, it feels like my willpower is so intense, right? It's so powerful, because and what it really comes down to is that there's no tricks to this. Like when we talked about some of these solutions that people try to use for these circumstances, for the places where your inner voice of weakness shows up, those are like little tricks and gimmicks to try to solve the problem of the inner voice of weakness. This isn't a trick. I'm literally just overpowering that inner voice of weakness solely through my inner strength, right? There's no real kind of, like I said, trick that I'm using to try to get the same outcome without actually just having inner strength. No, my belief in myself is so powerful that it actually conquers or silences that inner voice of weakness. And not just in a single moment. It does it and keeps doing it over and over and over again, right? And so, like I said, I recommend to practice that. That's the champion mindset. It feels pretty amazing, right? Because like I said, you can never get used to failing, or you can never get used to being rejected or people criticizing you. Some people do that. They try that. I mean, that isn't how the subconscious works. If you attack me all day, I'm just eventually going to feel bad about myself. Doesn't matter how hard I try to avoid it, right? If I keep observing a subconscious form associated with the low self-esteem frequency, then I'm going to be inspired to charge at that frequency. I can't avoid it. Right? It's like if I listen to relaxing music, I'm going to start relaxing at some point. There's no way I can try to avoid relaxing while listening to relaxing music all day. That's not the proper solution. And what this also means is that fear of failure and fear of rejection and criticism, it never actually goes away. Some people think that that's not true. And I've heard that many times. Alright, so my camera actually cut off. So I think where I left off was, so yeah, people think that confidence, that anxiety or fear of failure, that people think that it at some point goes away and you never have to worry about it, right? That is definitely not how it works. And a lot of times people that you think of as very confident, people that you think of as very confident will generally tell you that. So I remember I saw, this was a long time ago, I think someone actually said it, but eventually I saw the interview, but I didn't necessarily watch it. But I believe Mike Tyson said something to the effect of how he's always afraid before a fight. So despite him having all this confidence, he always feels a little bit of fear. Same thing with, I heard this pickup artist guy who was talking about approaching girls. He said that sometimes people think if you approach enough girls and ask enough girls out, that the fear goes away. It doesn't, right? It's always there a little bit. So people who have the champion mindset, they're not trying to get to a place where there is no fear and there's no anxiety and you never have to worry about it and they'll be comfortable. No. When you have the champion mindset, you recognize that fear will always be there. The anxiety will always be there. That inner voice that tells you you're worthless. It's always going to be, you can't get rid of it, right? There's nothing you can do. It'll always be around. What you can do is make the champion part of your mind, which is its complement, or its opposite, you can make that part of your mind stronger, right, and louder than that voice. And so because they always come together, right, or really the champion part of your mind can get very, very, very quiet. But technically they're always there. But if you have the champion mindset, it's because you charge your subconscious to make the pro-you part of your mind very, very, very strong and very powerful. And because they're always charged, they're only useful really to charge in circumstances when the negative part of your mind tries to be around, tries to establish itself. When you have the champion mindset, you constantly have this desire to conquer, to conquer something, right? To overpower something, to overcome. You know what I mean? And the reason people who have this mindset constantly have this feeling is because what's really going on in the subconscious level is they're constantly trying to quiet the inner voice of weakness. Because they recognize it's only useful to kind of charge this part of your mind or charge this belief whenever the inner voice of weakness tries to show itself. So that sense of inner strength, it's always trying to establish itself by virtue of conquering something. And that's what manifests in the way people behave. So if you watch a lot of the motivational videos, right, like with E.T., my boy Eric Thomas, right, I really like his videos because when I'm charging this feeling of ambition and this feeling of, when I'm trying to charge that champion mindset, I'm constantly listening to these motivational videos because those have in more technical terms, you could say they have the arrangement pattern that approximates the subconscious form associated with ambition and self-belief, right? In other words, anything that, let's say, it has epic inspirational music, right, and it's telling me that I can do anything I want, I can accomplish this and that, and it's, it's not negative music, it's positive music, right? Those are the arrangement patterns associated with self-belief and confidence. So if I'm trying to charge champion mindset, let's say, it's always going to be charged relative to some activity that normally would make me feel bad. It could be people criticizing me, telling me I can't do it. It could be just the idea of failing, or if there's something I wanted to, but I'm like, that's too difficult. All of that is the inner voice of weakness. So you want to charge the feeling of belief that you can do it, that you can accomplish it. No one can stop you, right? You want to keep charging beliefs like that, specifically in places where the inner voice of weakness is going to try to make you feel like you can't do it. So the motivational videos, that's what they're pretty much doing. They're approximating the feeling, the subconscious form associated with self-belief. But specifically, they're doing it, they word it in such a way where it's like, it's kind of understood that you're always asserting these beliefs in circumstances where you would feel the need to doubt. So I actually recommend that. Watch videos. Eric Thomas is one of my favorites. But watch those videos, watch motivational videos, and you're going to notice that this is really what's going on in the subconscious level. In those videos, they keep telling you, don't worry about what people say. There's no such thing as failure. You can never lose, or There's no such thing as loss, only experience. Like, you'll be a winner. Stop listening to that stupid voice inside of you. What they're constantly setting up this sort of paradigm of a kind of fight within you, right? A fight between the champion part of you, the champion mindset, and the inner voice of weakness. And what they're trying to do is to get you to charge the champion mindset part of you, right? And when you perform this charge, you're going to notice that. You're going to notice that whenever you get in a slight situation where you feel a little bit of doubt or self-doubt or someone criticizes you, you're going to notice that you jump into this sort of mode where it's like you're trying to conquer the circumstance and you're trying to quell this inner voice or these opinions that, tell you that you're weak. You're trying to constantly overpower it and conquer it, right? It's not enough to just kind of think of yourself as capable. You specifically want to conquer that self-doubt, sort of get it on the ground, put it in a headlock, and make it say, "Uncle," submit to you, and admit that it lost, right? That's how this mindset makes you feel. So the champion mindset makes you always feel like you're at war with yourself, and you're constantly trying to overpower something. Right, and like I said, I believe you'll see that in those videos. Now, what I want to go over now is some. One last thing I want to say. When I would charge the champion mindset, and I specifically focus on circumstances that make me feel doubt, right, and like I can't achieve it, my subconscious will switch to a state, and it produces this transcendental belief, which could be very powerful, to say I can't do it. So what I'll do is I'll supercharge this using excitement burst to belief that I can. And what I know, I keep picking the hardest circumstances for me to do that in. It could be something as simple as like, I want to get on stage and be a comedian. That would make me super nervous if I was on stage. If someone randomly put me on stage and said, make them laugh, right? But what I could do is I could imagine it in my mind, develop subconscious paths for that activity, and every time I feel a sense of nervousness, I'll say, no, I can do it, and do an excitement burst charge. I'm going to conquer this. And I keep doing it over and over. It's hard at first, and that fear is always there a little bit, but the excitement, the champion mindset gets stronger. And then I notice that when I get in real world circumstances and I feel it, it's like I'm so used to conquering these environments that keep trying to make me feel like I can't do something, that the real conquering, expressing that state of strength or that mental strength in real world environments feels easy, right? Because they're nowhere near as hard as the stuff I was imagining in my mind, conquering these circumstances that I imagined in my mind. So now, like I said, if you do it wrong, if you do it just like with a simple subject, right, then you'll experience a drop-off problem. So if you have a lot of confidence just focusing on single activity from a very narrow perspective, then it's not going to carry in real-world environments. And we talked about this really in Chapter 13, but I'm just saying, you want to charge it in your mind in a way where it has enough subconscious paths, where it has universality. And then you could walk around with this intense form of, just this air of ambition and belief. What it kind of reminded me of is, for people that watch One Piece, it's called Conqueror's Haki, right? That's what I felt like I had. I felt like I awakened it within myself when I had kind of stumbled upon this charge, right? And this charge has obviously been around, but I kind of observed it from the perspective of all of this when I just kind of expressed that intensity of belief, right? It was like finding my Conqueror's Haki, right? Because that's how it makes you feel. It makes you feel like through sheer intensity of will, you can push back others' will and like sort of conquer and overpower them, because that's what you're always really doing to that inner voice of yours, right? And so you'll see people who can walk around in this state. You'll just kind of know from the way they talk and the way they behave that they have the champion mindset. And it's like their willpower is so strong, it pushes others back and almost makes theirs submit to them, right? That's pretty much how it felt. But one thing I want to now talk about are some of the dangers, or not really dangers, but some of the caveats. There are negative aspects that can develop from the champion mindset. It's actually very positive on its own, but it can develop certain toxic behaviors. So, to go over this point, the champion mindset can lead to toxic behaviors, including a state of paranoia about others challenging you. Also, it strains the body, which I'll get to that in a moment. But because the champion mindset, you only have it, you only charge your subconscious properly to have it if you're constantly charging self-belief in the face of activities that would try to get you to charge self-doubt, right? So because it's always charged in that circumstance, the charge itself is going to constantly make you alter your perception to believe like you have to conquer something. You have to fight something that's trying to put you down, right? And that's good if you kind of leave it to a kind of inner war within yourself, but it can be bad if you start projecting that war onto others without proper cause, right? So I remember I was watching this video about, because when I had discovered this and I started giving it this name, champion mindset, I just started looking up videos on this concept, and I seen this video that talked about the toxic aspects of the champion mindset. And who was it? I think it was, oh man, I can't believe I forgot it. I think he was talking about Kobe Bryant, right? And he was talking about how Kobe Bryant, I forgot what it was. I think he was talking about something about Kobe Bryant, how he was very kind of mean to others and I think even teammates, like unnecessarily mean, like trying to crush their spirit and things like that. And the reason, what I also want to talk about, I think, well, that's true too, but I wanted to talk about something Jordan said in that, Michael Jordan. He was saying how he was saying how Kobe Bryant is a good finisher, right? And he has this mindset that is ultimately like a curse, right? It's like a gift and it's like a curse. And he basically said something to the effect how he has it too. That's why he understands it. And the reason it's a curse, and some people criticize Michael Jordan of this too, being very mean and kind of cold, right? And the reason why they do that is because they're constantly they keep projecting that inner war of theirs between the inner voice of weakness and the champion mindset. They keep projecting that war onto others. So anyone who kind of ostensibly seems like they're challenging them, they jump into this mode where they constantly try to crush their spirit, which is not even necessary, right? That's your teammate. Or even if it's like an opponent, they're not doing it like that. You don't have to do all that. But it's not even in the game. It could just be in practice or just like, interacting with each other outside of the court, right? They'll jump into this champion mindset mode where they're trying to crush someone's spirit for would seem to others to be for no reason. But they have charged this feeling, this champion mindset of conquering that inner voice of weakness so much, and their subconscious is so volatile to circumstances that look like it's trying to charge self-doubt even a tiny bit, that they just jump into that mindset and start trying to conquer that sense of self. But like I said, they project it onto other people, so conquering that inner voice of weakness means conquering other people and crushing them, right? So you can feel like you're the champion. But you don't want to do that, right? So I remember this, I think it was that same video, another one. No, it was another one. I forget who the guy was. I think it might have been Tracy McGrady. He was saying how he was practicing, right? So he was practicing basketball, and then he saw Kobe Bryant. He came in the gym and he saw Kobe Bryant there already training. He didn't know how long Kobe Bryant was there, right? But he just started practicing, and Kobe Bryant just wouldn't stop. He was there the whole time, even though the guy I'm talking about, which like I said, I think was Tracy McGrady, he came before Kobe Bryant. But he was exhausted, and he's like leaving, and Kobe Bryant was still there. So he came before Kobe Bryant and left. He came before Kobe Bryant and left before him, right? Before Kobe Bryant left. So he's like, Kobe Bryant was going really, really hard, right? And then I think it's some point in the video, right? It shouldn't be too hard to find. He talked to Kobe Bryant about it, and Kobe Bryant basically looked at him like, yeah, I did that. I basically stayed that long and kept practicing like that to let you know that. He said something to the effect to let you know like what it is, right? That basically I'm the man, right? I don't care how much you train, you need to recognize and respect me and my game. You know what I mean? Like recognize my sort of ability, my champion sort of stature, if you want to put it that way, right? In other words, you need to respect me. And that wasn't necessary, right? He was just going in to train and play basketball and, practice basketball. Why is he projecting this inner war onto this random person, right? So the champion mindset can often result in toxic behavior that and it can manifest itself in a way where you're constantly trying to crush other people because you perceive them as the inner voice of weakness. And I know because this happened kind of to me. It was something very simple, right? I noticed I was driving, right? So I'm driving, and then there's this guy, right? There was somebody coming this way, and normally, I would just let them go past, and then I go, right? But it was so kind of silly. But when I'm driving now, when I see this person trying to come, I'm like, no, I'm going first, right? You need to recognize that. Well, I'll be here all, like, I'm ready to, like, challenge them. Like, why? They're just driving. Who cares, right? But I would notice that behavior sort of coming up in my life, where now I'm looking at all these different circumstances with people who have nothing to do with any of this. I don't even know them. And sometimes it would be people I know, but it's like I'm trying to conquer the circumstance. So I stay in that mode, that championship mode. So just be careful with that. Don't project your own inner struggle and that own inner war onto other people. Right? If you do it properly, then the champion mindset is it's very helpful. It makes you feel very strong. Right? I loved being in that state. I don't charge it all the time because I use my subconscious for lots of other things. But what I also want to say is that it strains the body. So when this is basically an excitement burst charge, and it puts you in a zone with the feeling of confidence using very strong excitement bursts. So remember what I said, excitement burst charge are very straining on the body after a while. The body can handle it for I would say roughly 2 days. But more than like 2 or 3 days, it starts to strain the body, right? The neural activity in the brain is just too much, right? The brain can't handle it. It needs to relax more. So when I was doing this, and I could feel that happening, I started to relax. I stopped charging it and let it relax. And then it's like I couldn't wait to charge it again. But when I relaxed, I started to feel, what's the word I'm looking for? Like I was becoming more vulnerable because I felt so strong with this mindset charged up. But when it was going away, I felt vulnerable. I felt like that strong part of me is going away now. And now it's like I have no one to protect me. Right? So actually that goes into this point, which I'll just read this, is that people have different personalities, right? Relative to their subconscious charge. The strongest version of you is the one that has the champion mindset, right? So this is what I was kind of saying before. It is inaccurate to think of people as having a single personality, right? I'm not talking about personality disorder or things like that, which also play into things we'll talk about in book 2. I'm not talking about a sort of negative psychological problem, right? I'm talking about the way the subconscious works and the way we describe the state of a person's character, right? People have different personalities, right? Like when I'm charging my subconscious, I've charged my subconscious to be very smooth at talking to girls, and I'll jump into a completely different type of personality. I've charged my subconscious to feel like a king, right? And I'll have a different personality then. I've charged my subconscious to be super fun and just have fun making jokes, interacting with people, and then you'll see my personality change then. So people who've actually seen me will kind of see my personality jump between these different things because I'm performing different charges, right? And then there's times when I'm super nervous, right? Especially if I have to engage in public speaking or if I have to interact with others without really doing any of those charges, which has happened before because I'm doing other things, right? I'll feel nervous again. So you'll see the socially awkward, anxious character within me. So people have different personalities relative to which charge they're using. And what I really realize is the champion mindset. When you have the champion mindset, that's the part of you that's strong. Everybody has that strong version of them within themselves, because that's the part of you that specifically attacks the inner voice of weakness. And when any circumstance that would cause the inner voice of weakness to show up, then this guy is also going to show up and say, no, you're a piece of crap. And Snowball is going to say that to your inner voice of weakness and start trying to wrestle with it and put it on the ground and make it say uncle and force it to submit to it. And it would be like, I want you to say out loud that I've defeated you and I beat you, right? That's how the champion mindset makes you feel. So I feel like that's always the strongest version of you. And when you charge that version of you, it's like another part of you feels safe. It feels safe with that guy in charge, right? Because it doesn't matter how much you fail or how many people attack you. It could be a million other people calling you names and telling you you're a piece of crap. The moment, through the reflection principle, you start charging like, yeah, I am a piece of crap, this guy's going to show up and start forcing your subconscious to push back all those ideas and say, no, I can do this and I will succeed. So it's like, it's not invulnerable, but you have to keep it charged. But if you charge it up like crazy, right, it's always going to be around to just push back any self-doubt. And it just makes you feel so strong, right? But when I was letting it discharge, because it's hard to stay in that state for a couple days, it's like I feel like I'm weaker, right? It's like like I said, it felt like all the other personalities of me were feeling more vulnerable because this guy's going away now, right? But, so that's why a lot of people, and that manifests itself in two ways, right? So a lot of people who have this mindset, which is often athletes, you usually will see them go through a moment or a period of relaxing or zen, right? Because they have to let that energy discharge. They can't stay in it all the time. Otherwise, it's too emotionally straining. It's too straining on the brain. All that activity will cause you to start having trouble sleeping. It's just too much neural stimulation. So they'll often go through zen moments and periods of zen, and then they'll try to get back into that zone. But also, what they will do is they try to resist going out of that state also. They don't want to just relax and have fun with people and enjoy themselves more without feeling like they're in a battle. Because if they do that, they have that same feeling like, oh, the strong part of me is going away now. And then people will be able to attack me and make me feel weak. And on a subconscious level, they recognize this. But you still should do it. If you shouldn't really stay in a champion mindset all the time, because it's going to prevent you from just being able to enjoy yourself with others. And that's what I meant by toxic, sometimes it leads to toxic behaviors. You can enjoy yourself with the champion mindset, but you won't be able to really go deep into other frequencies, like having fun, and like we call it the fun frequency and making jokes. Your subconscious is going to have trouble organizing for different frequencies. And you can organize at this frequency. I can charge the confidence frequency and organize at the humor frequency, so I can tell jokes while on this frequency, or smooth lines to girls and things like that. But it gets harder, right? And then it's also easier if you relax yourself. An emotional charge is a calm burst charge, so that's completely anti-that. It's going to be harder to do that while you have the champion mindset. So as much as strong as this makes you feel, right, it's going to make it harder for you to charge other emotions and explore other emotions in a more relaxed way. And you feel other emotions generally feel better and more, the experience of them is more enjoyable when you're relaxed. So you just don't want to limit yourself to the champion mindset. But like, some people will just stay in that mindset all the time because they feel the strongest. And not for nothing, us men, right? So I don't know how it is for girls, right? I don't know what it feels like for a girl to want to be strong. But for men, we like to feel strong, right? We want to feel like a champion. We want to feel like we can conquer anything that comes our way. And so we feel very attracted to this state of mind once we discover it. Some people will go through their whole life without discovering that champion version of themselves. Like when I first learned to talk to girls, right, I discovered a new personality within me, how I interacted with girls, and I was a late bloomer. So I didn't discover that till I was 23 or 22 or 23. Some people don't discover it until they're in their 40s, right? So it just depends. Everyone's different. I was super shy and didn't really like talking to people at all. Then when I was later, or at least, like I said, that was actually when I first started discovering the principles that eventually led me to this, because I was constantly using theory to understand how to be a better speaker and interact with people better. I learned how to interact with people in a fun way and make jokes, right? And I developed all these subconscious paths, which I still carry with me to this day, even in long-term memory, when I discovered the fun version of myself. And so only recently, right, when I had the experience I talked about in the beginning of this super long video, right, I learned of the champion version of me, or the part of me that has a champion mindset, right? So again, there are different personalities. As men, we like to be strong, and we can get some people get stuck in the champion mindset because they just don't feel comfortable letting that part of themselves go away because they know they're going to be vulnerable. But I just want to say you don't have to do that, right? You can always get back to it. So, like I said, I know I actually didn't mean for this video to be that long, but this is I probably should have split the video up in two. This is a long kind of topic, but I wanted to make sure I covered all the angles. So yeah, that's the champion mindset. I recommend, especially if you're a guy and you've never discovered this version of yourself, right? Like I said, some people go through their whole lives without discovering it. They just have that inner voice of weakness kind of controlling them and dominating them. If you haven't done it, then I recommend to practice the champion mindset so you at least discover it, right? Watch the motivational videos and you're going to notice what I'm talking about. I also use those videos when I want to charge a champion mindset, because they help you to charge that frequency. And then, yeah, I think it'll change your life for the better, right? And you'll always know you have this version of yourself to be strong, right? Now, this is not to say that I can do anything now and without ever having fear, because like I said, the fear never goes away. The goal of this isn't to take away fear, it's to overpower it, right? I'm sure I would still have trouble public speaking, but, and I'm sure I could charge a champion mindset and subconscious paths to be better at it. But, I use my subconscious for 100 other things, so I don't always feel like charging that. A lot of times I actually use it, I'd probably say the thing I use it for mostly is to connect to God, which we'll talk about again in book 2. But anyway, this video is super long, but in the next video, I think we're going to talk about my theory on the differences between the way the subconscious behaves in women versus men. So this is something I kind of, a conclusion I came to based on my observations. But yeah, that's it for now though, but thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.